Hi friends, welcome back to the second installment of our seal video. We are picking up right where we left off with the head, and we're just about ready to take out our basting stitches. So it's handy to have a little tweezer around and some little snips for this. Let's just take a look at the head. That back opening is what we're going to use to turn it. And here's our little chin seams. Okay, so let's take our scissors and snip out a few spots of the basting stitches. You can go ahead and grab the threads with the tweezers if you have those handy. Oh, that one's a little caught. There we go. All right, so anywhere you see little bits of your basting thread, you can just pull that out with tweezers. You might have to go inside to get a knot that popped through. All right, so we have our head. I've got my finger there up into the nose area. And let's take these little needle nose pliers and go ahead and use those to help us turn the head. So I'm just going to pinch the inside where the nose is and turn it. So all of that stitching that we just did is going to be on the inside now, and that will make it look almost seamless when we're done. So I'm just going to go around in here with my finger and push out the seams and the nose. And kind of get it into a nice shape before I bring the back flap down here and we can stitch those seams. So we'll start with a knot as usual and a single strand of our thread. And then I want that knot to be on the inside, so I'm going to tuck it on the inside of that first edge there, and then it'll be hidden on the inside of the head as we whip stitch down here. So I put a little pin there at the point where the top head and the side head come together at the back of the neck, just to keep the seam even and organized for our stitching here. Sometimes something will have stretched a little bit as you sew, and you might have a little bit of slack that you want to try to ease in on that top head piece. But if it feels like it's too much that you need to ease in, you can always trim a tiny bit off the back, off the top head piece right where it connects at the neck. All right, there we go. So let's just knot off our thread, and then we can move on to the other seam on the back of the head. So same thing over here, we'll tuck our little knot inside and put our little pin at the connection between the top head and the side head. So let's just tuck that knot inside the seam between the two layers, and we can do our whip stitch. So I'm just going to go ahead and speed things up as I finish this back seam. All right, so we're down to our last stitch here, and maybe just do one or two on top of each other right at the base to secure the seam, and we'll knot off here. Okay, so there it is. The head is ready to get stuffed. So I'll just poke my bamboo skewer up in there and push out any seams to kind of open up the cavity for stuffing. So I like to use sort of small pinches of stuffing as I fill the cavity of the head. If you start with too big an amount, you often get this sort of lumpy look where you've got sort of these soft spots and hard spots. I'm not sure how to explain that, but or explain why, but I have found over the years that these multiple small pinches where you can push each one into the spot you want it to go, you just end up having a lot more control over the way you stuff the head. So as I'm stuffing, I like to turn the head and rotate it and look at, the front and the back and the sides and the nose area, and just try to keep the stuffing even all the way around. Otherwise, it can get a little bit lopsided or just a little funny looking if you don't go evenly around when you're stuffing. So what you're going to end up doing here is creating this, it's like a ball of, like a wad of stuffing in the center from all these little pieces that you're pushing in. And at some point, it's going to start to get a little bit difficult to push pieces into the center. And at that point, you want to shift so that your skewer is pushing between the ball of stuffing that you've been putting in there and the felt fabric itself. So you sort of shift to going all around the edges. And it's really incredible how much stuffing you can get in. If the head is understuffed, it can sort of collapse when you put the eyes on, which is is fine. It's like as you're learning to do this, you're going to make a bunch of different ones probably, and there's a little bit of a learning curve, and that's okay. But the head can collapse a little bit when you put the eyes in if it's not stuffed quite tight enough. Doesn't mean they're not going to look super cute. They are, but as you play around with it, you'll get a sense of how to get plenty of stuffing in there and make the heads nice and firm. See what I'm saying here? So I'm slipping my skewer in between so you can see where it's going, and that's how you can direct the stuffing once it gets a little bit filled in the center. You can kind of look around the head as you're turning it, and you might feel or see these little divots or pockets that don't have stuffing in them, and you can try to target those spots. So I can tell it's starting to get there, and the head has a pretty good shape, but it still feels a little soft to me. So I'm going to keep going with the stuffing. I still have some room around the edges, and it's still pretty easy to get the stuffing in between the center ball of stuffing and the edges of the felt. You see that little twisting motion that I'm doing? Sometimes, the ends of the bamboo skewers have a little bit of texture to them. Not so much that, they catch the stuffing in like a hangnail or something, but enough so that you can sort of spiral the tool or, spin the tool, and it will grab a bit of the stuffing and allow you to have more control over it. So looks like there's a little gap there that I can put a little more in. Oh yeah, and the pointy end does not work very well for stuffing. It just pokes through the fiber rather than grabbing it. So now when you've got a pretty well stuffed head, there's one more thing that you can do. See how I'm chopping up inside? I'm making this little channel that goes up inside the head. So now I can take some stuffing and fill the head from the center out. So I'm pushing all that other stuffing that I placed in the head. I'm pushing it outwards, and that's one way that you can get a really nice firm stuffing to the head without creating any lumpy bits. And you can keep doing that too. If you feel like you need more, you can cut another channel if you fill the one that you've made and make more room in there. Looks like there was one more little spot in here that could use a little bit more. I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is heat up our iron. And just go ahead and heat it up to its high setting. And what we're going to do is smooth out the fiber and the seams with the heat of the iron. So obviously, ironing three-dimensional things are not quite the same as ironing a shirt. So you're just going to hold it in one hand and hold the iron in the other, and just pivot it around, smoothing out the fibers and the seams. The back seams in particular, the ones that have the stitching on the outside, can be flattened out very nicely with the heat of your iron. Great, so now we are ready for the eyes. So these are the 6mm eyes from my Etsy shop. And if you have 5mm, you can probably use those too. You just might want to increase the size of the eyeliner around the eyes. So as far as the eyes, I placed them about 3/4 of an inch back from the end of the nose. And then I separated them across the bridge of the snout about 1 1/4 inch apart. I suggest you start with these measurements and see what you think on your seal. Try marking them with pins to get the placement you like. If you happen to make a skewer hole that you don't like, you can still make fine adjustments to its placement. Just create your second hole quite near the first. The new hole tends to push the first one closed, so there's a bit of flexibility if you need to play around with the placement. All right, to stitch the eyes on, I'm going to use a 2-ply length of the embroidery floss and just thread my needle here. So I'm using a long darner for this. The number 005 is a good size. It's small enough to go through the smallest eyes I carry, which are 4 millimeter, but plenty long enough to go through any of the heads that I make with my kits. So to attach the eyes, we're going to make our first pass through the head. And that knot that we just made, we want to lock that inside the stuffing of the head. So pass it through one direction and then back in the other direction, and then you're ready to add your first eye. So you can see the back of the eye has a little shank that sticks out from a flat surface. And what we want to do is bury that shank in the hole that we made with our skewer. Otherwise, the eyes will kind of sit proud of the surface and just, well, they just look a little funny. Not the end of the world, but this is the way to solve it. And then we'll get our second eye on there and pass it back through. So it's good to pull the first eye out of your way as you're doing that so that you don't catch any of the thread from the first pass. If your thread gets tangled or sort of knotted inside the head, you won't be able to pull the eyes taut and indent them like I've just done here. So now we're going to go back through. We just kind of pull the eye back enough so that you can get through that shank and go back and forth several more times to secure them in the head. So once you've got them secured in there, you are ready to knot off your thread. And so what we're going to do is an ending knot like we've done before and pull it nice and taut, and you can tuck that crossing right underneath the eye. And then you'll pass your needle back behind the eye as well and out the top of the head, and then just trim off the thread flush with the surface. So I think that looks pretty good. I think we are ready now for the nose. So if we look at our seal's face, you see right here where I'm pointing with the pin, it's the spot where the curve of the nose transitions from kind of curving forward to being flat in the front. So we want to find that spot right there where the transition is, and that's where the nose is going to go. Not up here, but more forward in the front. Okay, so I've got my number 8 needle here threaded with 2 strands of that sort of gray-brown color that I like, that's DMC number 3021. Oh, here, you see this little knot? It didn't quite want to go through, so I'm just going to poke a hole just a tiny bit bigger and pop it through. And then we can scratch over that later if we need to hide it. So I'm making this nose about 1/4 of an inch wide, and I don't know if you can see here, but I'm looking at the line of the top head darts and the way that they come down, and centering the nose between those little darts. There we go, there's our first row. So basically we're doing a satin stitch here, which means we want our stitches to lay right next to each other so that there's no fabric showing through. And I think probably 3 or 4 rows or 3 or 4 stitches across will make a good size for the nose. So that's 3. Yeah, maybe let's do a 4th. What do you think? Let's go for it. 4 across. And then I'm going to come up at the top of the nose here, not to make a stitch necessarily, but just to reorient my needle so that I can make my next stitch. So now I'm going to make that vertical part of that sort of connects the nose and the mouth. And I'll bring that up and reorient my needle again back behind the nose. And then I'll come down and create one side of the mouth. So it's at a slight angle down and to one side. And then I'm going to give him a little tip up on that side that gives him a little smile. So I brought that one up at a slight angle. And then I'll go back to the other side. And I'm going to make a back stitch up to my center line there. So we'll meet at that juncture here. And then we'll do the upturn on the other side of the mouth. See how that tips up a little bit? And then we'll just knot off and trim the thread flush once we pop our knot through. There we go. And we'll just pull that thread a little bit and trim it flush. Okay, so there's our little nose and mouth. So let's move on to the ears. So these are our little ear pieces. And what we're going to do with these is pinch and stitch the flat edge just so that we get the little shape like that for the ears. So I've got my needle threaded with a single strand of thread and knotted at the bottom. And I'm just going to hide that starting knot right in between the fold when I pinch the flat edge of the ear. And let's just do a couple of whip stitches that tack that into place. And then we can, there it is, so cute. Then we can do a little ending knot and set that aside and then put them onto the head. So the thing about ear placement on these little seals is, as I've looked at lots of pictures of seals, some of them have ears that are visible like we're making here, and some of them have more like a little hole in their head and not really anything that comes off the surface like this. And some of them seem to be lower and some of them are higher. And so I think as far as the placement goes, you should just play around, pin them in a couple of different places, look at some pictures on Instagram or on, do a little Google search, and pin the ears on in a few different places until you're happy with them. That's kind of what I did here. And you can certainly look at the way that I've got them pinned as well. Maybe we'll just lower them a little bit. So that feels pretty good to me. I think I'm going to go with it. So I've got my needle threaded here again with a single thread, and we'll just make a knot at the end. So I'm going to come in from just behind the ear and pop the knot through. And then I'll catch the ear. Let's see if on this first one we can really show you what's going on here. So I'll catch the ear, and then I'm going to catch the head. See what's going on there. So I've got sort of like a whip stitch that goes through the head and the ear at the same time. Now that I've taken the pin out, this one's being a little bit unruly. So I'll get the ear again, and then I'll go back down and grab a little bit of the head. ear, head. So what is that, 3 stitches? Something like that. Probably just enough to get across the ear, but I think I want the ear to drop down a little bit and not stick out quite as much. So I'm going to grab the underside of the ear and tack it down to the head a little bit just underneath. Great, that's nice. So see how it pulls the ear down when you do that? So now we'll just knot off the thread with a nice ending knot underneath there. Maybe 2 for strength. And then we're going to pop our knot through and trim it on the top of the head. Okay, so I'm just going to speed things up a little bit, and we're going to repeat that same process on the opposite ear. So back and forth through the head and the ear, and then underneath we'll do that little tacking stitch that pulls the ear down. And then on this one, I'm doing my knot on the top of the head instead of under the ear, which also works. So I'm just going to make my ending knot here, and then we will hide the knot again. So we'll just put the needle into the hole behind the knot and pop it through. Okay, so he's pretty cute, little bit of shaping there, and then we are ready for our black micron pen in the 005 size. So this is super fine, and we're going to use this for the eyeliner around the eyes. So we're just going to go ahead and go right around the eyes at an angle and try to get a nice black line that just completely encircles the eye. You can kind of tuck that point underneath the eye as well if you want to really get the black line butting up to the eye itself. Once you've got a circle around the eye, you can make a little tail that goes down the front like that, and a little tail that goes off the back like that, and it gives the eye like a little bit more almond shape. So that looks good. Let's go ahead and repeat that on the second eye. Little circle around and the little tails in the front and the back to give it that nice almond shape. Nice. Okay, so now we're ready to do a little bit of shading on the seal's face, and I'm using this little box of Maybelline Nudes eyeshadow for my shading. And it's a little bit like using pastels. We want to take the eyeshadow and kind of softly spread it into the fiber, and then after that we'll set it with hairspray. But so the colors that I use the most are this dark charcoal color, and that's in the far right corner, and then the brown that's above it, and then also that sort of matte pink that's just to the left of the brown at the top. Some of the other ones have some sparkle in them, which I just don't find to be it doesn't work as well, for the animals, giving them sparkly faces. So you can actually do this shading before you stitch the nose as well, but I thought it would be easier for us to see our stitching if we did that on the white face. So either way is fine, but I've just done it in reverse order so that you could see it better for our video here. So I'm using a bit of that dark charcoal color and just kind of smushing it in a bit with my finger. I've got my little paper towel down here to protect my desk surface. And I'm just going to kind of softly add it around the stitching and kind of press it in, and you can rub it a little bit. So I'm going to do the snout the darkest, or right at the tip of the nose the darkest, and then I'm going to fade in to make a little bit of an ombre kind of coloring on the nose of his face, or on the snout. So again, each layer I just kind of futz around with my finger and mush it around. I would say on this adding the makeup thing, you don't want to rush it, because you can sometimes get a little too much. But go ahead and experiment. If you want to experiment on some scrap fabric first or something like that, so you can get the shading technique down before you do it on your actual seal, that's always a good thing to do. So I'm adding a little bit of that kind of soft pink and blending it in with my brown and my gray to soften that edge. I always get a lot of this stuff on my fingers while I'm doing it, so it's handy to have a paper towel or like a little wet wipe or something like that nearby. And then I also just use my fingers as well to get even a softer edge than I can get with that little applicator that comes in the box. So go ahead and finish shading the face and getting the coloration that you want with the different tones of eyeshadow you've got. Spread it and soften it with your paper towel or your fingers. Any places that look like they've got an uneven coloring, you can dab a little bit more of whatever color works best there. And then when you're happy with the face, we can move on to giving it a little hairspray and setting the eyeshadow to the fiber of the felt. I'm just going to give it a little spritz here. So we don't want to leave that hairspray on the surface of the fiber. We want to sort of press it into the surface. It can dry on the surface and have these little kind of white beady looking things. But if you just press it in with your fingers or the paper towel, that will do the trick. So now I've heated up my iron and I have it on a high setting, and I'm just going to go around over top of my eyeshadow and hairspray and press down the fibers. Be careful of the eyes as you're doing this, because those are plastic and those can melt or get sort of a funny melted spot in them. So just avoid those, or kind of carefully go around them with the tip of the iron. All right, so we are almost done with the head, and then we are going to be ready to attach it to the body. I am getting excited. I can't wait to see them come together. All right, so let's get cleaned up a little bit and get the body and take a look at the two together. Super cute. So we're going to go ahead and cut a channel up into the head, and that's where our pipe cleaner is going to get inserted into. So I folded those pipe cleaners that are coming out of the body, and we're just going to slide those up into the channel we made. And oh my God, he's so cute. All right, looks good. So the next thing we want to do is get our number 8 needle threaded with 2 strands of our embroidery floss. So for the neck and the flippers and anything that might require extra tension, like we're going to do to pull this taut around the neck, you definitely want to have 2 strands. And what we're doing here is going to be a blind stitch, so you won't see it at all anyway. But let me just start. I'm going to start and make the stitch completely visible for you. And then when we get all the way around the neck, we'll pull it taut. So I'm going to tuck that knot right underneath where the head is resting and center the head, center those back seams on the back of the body. Then I'm going to make parallel stitches that go first through the head, then through the body, then back through the head. So basically this is a running stitch, but you're doing it from the opposite side of the fabric. So let's see if we can see a little bit better here. So there we go, that's a bit better. So you can see how those stitches look. Now at this point I would usually tighten it up, but I'm going to leave everything loose just so that we can together kind of look at the way these stitches pull in and draw the edge of the head down, and it tucks itself in under. It sort of tucks itself in with this stitch in a way that makes them come together really beautifully. A little hard to articulate for some reason. As you're doing it, definitely tighten it, like, maybe 3 times as you're going around. It does get a little trickier to tighten it all at the end, which is what I'm going to attempt here. Okay, so it looks like one more stitch and then we've come full circle. Can you see those stitches? They all look like these vertical sort of ticks around the neck. And then I'm going to take the thread and draw it in, and it actually pulls all the way around, so all those little stitchy tick marks just disappear. I like to go around the heads a second time just for safety and security. Nobody wants to lose their head. So that's it, just go around a second time. And then when you get to the other side, you can go ahead and just knot off your thread and bury the knot again. Righto, okay, so we are ready for the flippers. So I've got another strand, well, 2 strands plied together of our embroidery floss, and we're going to attach our flippers. So I've got a long needle here. Again, this is the long darner in the 005 size. So get our little starting knot cooking. And first of all, on the flippers, you just want to make sure you've got them oriented so that the side that sticks the best, which is the side that is magnet to magnet, not with the pipe cleaner in the way. So you've got them oriented so that they'll stick the strongest. And I'm just going to do a little ironing on his body too while I have the flippers off. You can spritz the body with a little hairspray too if you just want to kind of flatten out those fibers and so he doesn't get fluffed up. I'm going to go ahead and do that. Give him a little spritzy. I'm just covering the eyes when I do the hairspray because it can sort of dull the surface of them so they're not as shiny. And then I'm going to press off the excess and sort of smush the hairspray into the fiber again, like we did on the head earlier. Now we're going to go back and press again. And that will just keep all those fibers in order. Sometimes the animals can get a little bit, with too much handling, they can get a little bit fluffed up, and if they get too much love. And so the hairspray just kind of keeps the fibers a little bit more in order. My samples often get a lot of attention from visiting kids and my nieces and nephew, and so then I have to go take photos of them again, and so I often will do a little pressing just to kind of freshen them up if they're looking a little fuzzed out. Okay, so now it is flipper time. So I've got my 2 flippers here, and the first thing that I'm going to do is totally optional. I pulled out my paper towel again, and I'm just going to brush out the surface a little bit on these guys, similar to what we did on the red panda, but not quite to the same extent. So I'm just going to go over the surface of the front and the back of both flippers with my pin, and then after that, if you've got a stiff brush, I have maybe a really stiff toothbrush, or this is a brush that I got with my juicer, and I've confiscated it to use for craft stuff. But I just like the way that a little bit of softness looks on the flippers. The other thing you can do too is darken the leading edge of the flipper, and maybe even the tail flippers as well. I did that on my first sample too, but I didn't end up doing it on the subsequent ones. But I did like it. All right, so there's our hairspray. Flip them over a little more, and then we can dry them off with our paper towel again. Just pressing in that hairspray. So those look pretty cute, just a little bit softer, and then that hairspray is going to hold that soft surface in check. So now we are ready to put them onto the body. So here we go with our 2 strands of thread and the long darner. So I'm inserting the long darner through the body on the seam line about 3/8 of an inch down from where the head is attached. And then I'm just double checking my flippers to make sure that their magnets stick. And we're going to attach the first flipper. So we'll be stitching back and forth through the flipper, the body, and the opposite flipper, like this. So you're going to come through the flipper one way, then go back through the flipper the opposite way, leaving a little horizontal line, and then go back across to the other seam line. Make sure you're not tangled. So to attach this second flipper, we're going to come through one side here, go back the opposite direction, and just make sure the flippers are oriented with the kind of flip up at the end, the sort of hand portion of the flipper going forward. And when you're coming through, if you try to match the stitch back and forth that you made on previous passes, it will just make the attachment look a lot tidier. All right, so that's my last one. I think I did, I don't know, 3 or 4 passes back and forth through the body. Just want to make sure that it's again, it's like another attached piece, so it's secure for playing. And then you can tuck your knot right under the flipper pit right there. And then I'm just going to trim off right underneath. So that's our guy. So then you can goof around and bend the little flippers so he's waving, or then you can play around with bending them in a way so that the magnets attach. There we go. So that is it. Our little seal is finished. I hope you enjoy stitching up your own little seal pup, and I can't wait to see your photos on Instagram. Remember to tag them with our new hashtag CTSPatreon so we can all share with each other. And as ever, thank you so much for making this possible. I love having you as part of my creative team. So that's it for now. Happy stitching, and see you soon.